There are moments in life when anguish becomes so heavy that it seems to press against the very breath, when the chest tightens, the mind races, and the heart feels trapped inside a silence that no human voice can break. It is the kind of suffering that does not shout, yet it suffocates, that does not wound the body, yet leaves the soul trembling. In this state, the person begins to wonder if anyone sees, if anyone hears, if anyone understands the weight they are carrying. But heaven hears what the world overlooks. Heaven moves toward the one who feels they are sinking. And in this moment, as you listen, heaven bends close to you. Anguish is not weakness. It is the soul signaling that it is under pressure greater than it can bear alone. It exposes the truth that human strength has limits, but divine mercy does not. When anguish reaches the point where words can no longer hold it, something sacred happens. The heart cries out silently, and that cry rises to God with a force stronger than sound. It reaches the throne of the Almighty, and he responds not with delay, but with compassion. He sends his protector, the Prince of the heavenly host, Saint Michael the Archangel, to draw near to the one who can barely breathe under the weight of invisible sorrow. Saint Michael does not wait for perfect prayer or polished words. He responds to sincerity, to pain offered in faith, to the humble plea of a soul that says, "I can't carry this anymore." The Archangel comes as the defender of hearts, carrying the light that pushes back the darkness of confusion, fear, and despair. He comes to restore order where emotion has become chaos, to breathe courage into a heart that feels fragile, and to protect the dignity of someone who feels they are breaking inside. His presence is not distant or untouchable. It is immediate, attentive, and filled with divine authority. As this prayer begins, imagine your anguish not as something ignored by heaven, but as something seen. Imagine the very pain that has suffocated you, becoming the reason Saint Michael is now descending toward your life. The God who knows every thought and measures every tear does not abandon the soul in anguish. He sends his warrior not only to defend you from spiritual darkness, but to lift the emotional weight that threatens your peace. Saint Michael stands as proof that you are not battling this alone, that what suffocates you is not stronger than the one who protects you, and that peace is not a distant hope, but a gift heaven desires to place into your heart. This video is not meant to soothe momentarily. It is meant to open a path of healing. It is an encounter with divine help, a moment where heaven intervenes in the silence of human suffering. Allow this introduction to awaken expectation in you, because God hears anguished hearts more quickly than any other. The breath you struggle to find is the breath Saint Michael now brings back to you. Step into this prayer with honesty. Bring your pain as it is, without disguise. You do not need to be strong right now, you only need to allow heaven to be strong for you. The invisible weight that crushes the heart. Anguish often arrives without warning. It settles quietly at first, then grows until it feels like a stone pressing against the chest, a heaviness that no deep breath seems able to lift. The mind becomes a whirlwind of thoughts that move too quickly to understand, yet too loudly to ignore. The heart feels alone even when surrounded by people. This is the hidden suffering that wears the soul down. Not visible wounds, but internal pressure that bends the spirit until it trembles. Many try to explain this pain, but anguish rarely fits into sentences. It is an ache the heart feels before the mind can comprehend it. What most people do not realize is that anguish is not only emotional, it is often spiritual. When confusion rises without cause, when fear appears without reason, when discouragement grips the heart without explanation, the soul is under attack. Darkness does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, planting doubts, stirring fear, tightening the chest and clouding reason. It tries to convince the heart that peace is impossible and that relief will never come. The soul is not weak when it feels this way. It is targeted. And what is targeted by darkness is also chosen for grace. This is why Saint Michael becomes essential in moments like these. Anguish may begin in the emotions, but it is sustained by spiritual forces that seek to disturb the soul's peace. The enemy knows that a heart weighed down by fear becomes vulnerable, tired, and discouraged. Yet the presence of Saint Michael reveals a deeper truth. What anguish tries to crush, heaven rises to defend. The Archangel sees what the human eye cannot perceive, the layers of fear, the knots of anxiety, the silent cries that never reach the lips. He does not wait for the heart to collapse. He moves the moment the soul begins to bend. When anguish feels unbearable, it is not the sign of abandonment, but the sign that heaven is watching the soul with particular tenderness. The very weight that threatens to crush you is the reason Saint Michael is now drawing near, ready to defend, ready to lift, ready to break the chains that sorrow has tightened around your heart. Anguish is not the end. It is the moment heaven prepares to fight for you. When heaven sends help, the Archangel who responds to anguish. When anguish reaches the point where the soul can no longer pretend to be strong, something sacred happens in the invisible realm. Heaven moves with urgency toward the one who suffers. God does not look at the anguish of his children with distance. He looks with compassion, and in his mercy, he sends the warrior who has always stood as the guardian of troubled hearts, Saint Michael the Archangel. His mission is not only to fight the forces that threaten salvation, but to protect the soul when its interior world begins to collapse under the weight of sorrow. Saint Michael responds not to perfection, but to sincerity. The heart does not need to know what to say. It does not need to form long prayers or express every detail of its pain. A single whisper, a silent plea, or even a sigh of exhaustion is enough to call the Archangel into battle. The one who once defeated the ancient serpent does not ignore the silent suffering of a soul gasping for peace. He bends toward the wounded heart with the strength of a warrior and the tenderness of heaven's guardian. His presence is not far or symbolic. It is real, active, and immediate. In the spiritual realm, anguish appears like a shadow around the heart, a tightening of the interior life that steals clarity and burdens the spirit. Saint Michael sees this shadow even when the person cannot describe it. He recognizes the invisible attacks hidden within emotional pain. Where humans see only discouragement, he sees the traces of confusion planted by the enemy. Where humans feel only fear, he discerns the spiritual pressure trying to suffocate hope. And he acts, not slowly, not hesitantly, but with the swiftness of one who has been commanded by God to defend the children of light. Imagine this moment. As anguish rises in the soul, heaven opens. Light begins to move downward like a river flowing through darkness. Saint Michael steps forward, his presence pushing back everything that tries to overwhelm you. His wings, radiant with divine fire, form a shield around your heart. His sword, forged in obedience to the Almighty, cuts through the unseen forces feeding your distress. He does not condemn your pain, he protects you within it. He does not demand that you be strong, he lends you his strength. He does not watch from afar. He enters the very space where your anguish lives and begins to dismantle it piece by piece. This is why his intervention is essential. Human words cannot always break anguish. Human comfort cannot always quiet the storm inside. But the presence of Saint Michael reaches where no human hand can go. It enters the depths of the heart, the layers of the mind, the places where fear hides. And there he performs the mission entrusted to him by God, to restore peace where anguish has claimed territory, to lift the soul where despair has pushed it downward, and to remind the person that they are not abandoned, not unseen, not forgotten. When Saint Michael comes, he does not bring temporary relief. He brings divine order. He brings clarity where chaos ruled. He brings strength where weakness grew. He brings peace not as the world gives, but as God gives. His presence is heaven's promise that anguish does not have the final word. The one who sent him remains faithful, and his messenger stands now beside you, ready to carry you out of the shadow that has suffocated your heart, the tear that calls down light. There are depths of pain that words cannot touch. A person may try to explain what is happening inside, but anguish often escapes language. It is not simply sadness. It is a pressure that builds beneath the ribs, a tightening in the throat, a trembling of the soul that no explanation can fully express. When anguish reaches this level, speech becomes fragile, thoughts become scattered, and even prayer becomes difficult. The heart wants to cry out, yet the voice falters. And in that moment of human limitation, something profoundly spiritual takes place. A single tear falls, and that tear becomes the most powerful prayer the soul can offer. A tear shed in sincerity speaks the truth the mouth cannot form. It carries the weight of fear, exhaustion, disappointment, and the silent plea for help. It is not a sign of defeat, but a sign that the soul has stopped pretending to be strong. And in heaven, honesty holds immense power. God sees the tear long before it reaches the earth. Psalm after psalm affirms that God gathers the tears of his children, not as symbols of despair, but as evidence of trust, as treasures of the heart presented before his throne. When anguish grows so heavy that the soul can no longer hide behind forced strength, the tear becomes an act of surrender. It says, without words, "Lord, I cannot carry this." And that confession, humble and real, rises to heaven with a force that no storm of darkness can hinder. The tear becomes light in the spiritual realm, a spark in the shadows, a beacon that calls the attention of the angels. In that moment of vulnerability, heaven listens more closely than ever, because God never ignores the cry of a wounded heart offered with truth. Saint Michael the Archangel, protector of those who suffer spiritual and emotional distress, is commanded to move toward the soul that cries in such a way. His mission is not only to fight the ancient enemy, but to defend the human heart when it stands at the edge of breaking. He sees what no human eye can perceive, the trembling of the spirit, the suffocating weight of fear, the confusion clouding the mind. And he responds not with distance or hesitation, but with a swift burning compassion that reflects the mercy of God himself. In the unseen realm, the tear glows. It breaks through the fog of discouragement, cutting a path upward to heaven. It signals to Saint Michael that the soul has reached its limit, that the battle is pressing inward rather than outward, that anguish is constricting the heart in ways that silence cannot describe. The Archangel does not judge this pain. He does not demand composure. He comes because the tear shows him the truth. The person is suffering deeply, and that suffering has become a call for divine help. Imagine the moment in spiritual reality. The tear falls, yet in heaven it rises, shining with sincerity. It drifts upward like a small flame in the dark night until it reaches the presence of God. From that moment, a command is given. Saint Michael steps forth, radiant with divine authority, and descends toward the soul in anguish. He does not come slowly or cautiously. He comes like a bolt of light, piercing the darkness that surrounds the heart, moving through the unseen forces that have fed discouragement and fear. His wings expand like a shield, forming a barrier around the suffering soul, and his presence begins to push back everything that tried to suffocate the spirit. This is the mystery of suffering in the eyes of heaven. What crushes the heart on earth becomes a cry that moves armies of angels. Our tear that breaks the silence becomes the prayer that summons protection. Saint Michael does not stand above the pain. He enters into the space where the anguish lives. He touches the mind clouded by anxiety, bringing clarity. He touches the heart that beats too quickly under pressure, bringing calm. He touches the memories that feed despair, bringing truth that dissolves their power. The tear becomes the doorway through which peace begins to enter. There is a reason why a tear shed in faith is so powerful. It shows heaven that the soul is no longer hiding behind pride. It shows that the heart is willing to be healed. When the person reaches the point of saying, "Lord, I cannot continue by myself," heaven does not condemn that weakness, it honors it. It sees that the struggle has been real, the pain has been honest, the effort has been sincere. In the tear, God sees the deepest part of the heart, and he sends his archangel to lift what the soul can no longer carry. As Saint Michael draws near, the tear dries, not because the pain is forgotten, but because the burden is being lifted. His light enters the places where sadness hid itself, illuminating thoughts that had grown dark, softening wounds that seemed unreachable. The heart begins to breathe again. The mind begins to quiet. The body begins to release the tension it has held for too long. What felt suffocating begins to lose its power, not because of human strength, but because divine presence has taken its place. This is the turning point in the spiritual journey of anyone who suffers anguish. The tear that once represented breaking becomes the seed of healing. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes the reason heaven intervenes. The soul that once felt alone discovers that even in silence it was heard. Saint Michael comes not as a distant guardian, but as a defender who understands the weight of human pain and carries divine authority to bring peace where anguish once reigned. Your tear has already spoken. Heaven has already listened. And Saint Michael is already moving toward your heart, bringing the light that will break the darkness and the peace that your soul has been longing for. The sword that cuts through emotional darkness. Emotional anguish does not remain confined to feelings. It spreads like a shadow across the mind, tightening its grip until thoughts become tangled, hope becomes faint, and the soul feels trapped in a prison without walls. The person suffering often thinks the pain is entirely emotional, but much of what they feel is spiritual pressure weighing upon the heart. Fear disguises itself as reality. Confusion masquerades as truth. Discouragement whispers with the tone of certainty. And beneath these layers, the enemy works silently, tightening invisible chains around the soul. This is why human effort alone often cannot break through anguish. Because anguish is not only emotional, it is a form of spiritual darkness. And spiritual darkness cannot be fought with human weapons. It requires divine intervention. Saint Michael the Archangel carries within his mission the authority to confront this type of darkness. From the beginning of time, he has been the warrior who defends the order of God against the disorder of evil. His presence is not symbolic. His sword is not metaphorical. Everything about him is rooted in the will of God. When he comes to a soul crushed by emotional anguish, he does not come to observe or simply comfort. He comes to fight, and the weapon he brings into that spiritual battle is the sword forged in the fire of divine truth. The sword of Saint Michael is not made of metal. It is formed from pure obedience, pure justice, pure fidelity to God. It carries no hatred, no cruelty, no violence. What it cuts with purpose. It strikes not the person, but the forces that bind them. It pierces not the heart, but the illusions suffocating it. It slices through confusion, revealing the lies that fed despair. It breaks the chains of fear, exposing fear as nothing more than darkness pretending to have power. The sword of Saint Michael is the perfect contradiction of anguish, because where anguish brings suffocation, the sword brings clarity. Where anguish tightens, the sword releases. Where anguish blinds, the sword illuminates. Imagine the spiritual scene at the moment your anguish reached its heaviest point. The mind was tangled with anxious thoughts. The heart was beating under pressure. The interior space felt dim, cramped, and suffocating. In that moment, the sword of Saint Michael descended like a beam of light cutting through a sealed room. The darkness that surrounded your emotions did not resist with strength. It simply dissolved. Darkness cannot endure truth. It cannot remain where divine authority enters. The sword does not fight with equal force against evil. It overpowers instantly because it carries the command of God. In the same way lightning splits the sky, the sword of Saint Michael splits the suffocating weight of anguish. This is why the presence of the Archangel brings immediate relief even when circumstances remain unchanged. The battle happens first in the invisible realm. When his sword cuts through emotional darkness, the mind begins to clear. What felt overwhelming suddenly becomes manageable. Thoughts calm, panic loosens, the heart feels less pressured. It is not the situation changing first. It is the darkness losing its grip. Many people believe that emotional relief comes from external changes, but spiritual truth teaches the opposite. Relief begins when the chains inside the heart are broken. The sword of Saint Michael strikes those chains long before the person sees the fruit of that victory. His mission in moments of anguish is delicate yet powerful. He does not silence emotion, he frees it. He does not invalidate fear, he reveals its emptiness. He does not ridicule the soul for trembling, he steadies it with the authority of heaven. And when he cuts through the spiritual darkness, he makes room for peace to enter. The sword opens a path where the person once saw only walls. It allows light to reach the corners of the soul where despair hid itself. It gives the heart space to breathe again. It gives the mind permission to hope again. The power of his sword also lies in its precision. Saint Michael strikes exactly what must be struck. He sees the root of anguish, the hidden thought that triggered the spiral, the old wound that reopened in silence, the lie that wrapped itself around your identity. He does not cut blindly. He cuts with discernment. His sword removes what does not belong to you, fear, discouragement, confusion, without harming what God placed within you, dignity, faith, courage, and the capacity to love. By cutting away what is false, he reveals what has always been true, that you are more resilient than fear suggests, more loved than anguish admits, more protected than your emotions understood. When the sword of Saint Michael moves, the battle shifts. The darkness that once seemed immovable begins to crumble. The emotional weight lifts little by little, not because the person suddenly found inner strength, but because the spiritual heaviness has been broken. Anguish feeds on spiritual shadows. Once those shadows disappear, anguish weakens. The sword does not solve every problem instantly, but it removes the darkness that kept the soul from standing. And once the soul can stand, peace can begin its work. Saint Michael's sword is the promise that emotional darkness is not final. It is the assurance that anguish does not have the last word. It is the sign that God has not abandoned you, nor left you to fight alone. When the Archangel intervenes, everything hidden becomes clear, everything heavy becomes lighter, and everything suffocating begins to loosen its grip. His sword does not leave scars, it leaves freedom. It opens the way for the next grace, the descent of peace. The descent of peace. When Saint Michael breathes calm into the soul, after the sword of Saint Michael has cut through the invisible darkness surrounding the heart, a profound stillness begins to open within the soul. It is not sudden silence, nor is it the absence of emotion. It is the beginning of a divine movement. Peace does not rush in, it descends with intention, like a gentle light settling over stormy waters. This descent is one of the most sacred moments in spiritual healing because it reveals that God is not only a warrior who fights for his children, but a father who comforts them. Peace is not the reward of battle. It is the presence of God filling the spaces where anguish once dwelled. Imagine the interior landscape of your heart after the conflict. The confusion has been pierced, The suffocating weight has been loosened. The shadows have begun to withdraw. In this newly opened space, a softness begins to form, as though the atmosphere around your soul has shifted. Breathing becomes easier. The mind, once clouded, finds clarity in small but meaningful ways. This is not psychological illusion. It is the fruit of divine intervention. Peace does not come from the world, nor from effort, nor from distraction. It comes from heaven descending to rest within the soul. Saint Michael plays a unique role in this moment. Though he is known as a warrior, his presence carries a tenderness that few understand. His mission is to guard the dignity of the soul, and part of that mission is restoring calm after the spiritual storm. When Saint Michael breathes peace into the soul, it is not the peace of avoidance or the peace of escape. It is a peace that reaches the deepest parts of the heart, the parts where wounds live, where sorrow has etched its marks, where fear had settled like dust. His peace does not erase emotion, it orders it. It does not suppress pain, it soothes it. Picture the Archangel descending with wings that radiate soft, steady light. The fiery brilliance of battle is still present in him, but now it is tempered by a calm that feels almost maternal in its tenderness. His wings fold around the soul not to shield it from danger this time, but to give it space to rest. His presence becomes like a warm embankment around a troubled heart, allowing it finally to loosen its grip on fear. This descent of peace is not distant or mystical. It is intimate. It reaches the core of the person, entering the very place where anguish once dug its roots. As peace descends, the body responds. Shoulders relax, the breath softens. The tightness in the stomach begins to ease. The heartbeat becomes steady, no longer racing under the weight of emotional distress. This physical shift is the echo of spiritual reality. The soul and the body are intimately connected. When divine peace enters the spirit, the body receives the signal that it may rest. It is the reversal of what anguish caused. Where anguish once tightened, peace loosens. Where anguish once suffocated, peace opens. Where anguish once clouded, peace clarifies. This peace is not passive. It works quietly but with power. It begins to gather the scattered pieces of the heart, gently bringing them back into alignment. The mind, which was overwhelmed with racing thoughts, starts to settle into a still rhythm. Even memories that carry pain begin to lose their sharpness as they are illuminated by divine truth. Peace does not erase the past. It places the past into the hands of God, and in the hands of God, nothing has the power to harm you anymore. Saint Michael's peace also brings spiritual clarity. It allows the soul to recognize the presence of God in the midst of the suffering. Anguish blinds the heart, making God feel distant, hidden behind layers of fear and confusion. But when peace descends, the soul begins to recognize that God was never far. He was present even in the moments when you felt most alone. Peace reveals the truth that suffering does not mean abandonment and that silence does not mean absence. It restores trust by showing that God's mercy has been working even in the shadows. This descent of peace is also preparation. It prepares the soul for the next grace, the next step in healing. Peace is not the end. It is the foundation. It gives the heart strength to pray again, to hope again, to desire goodness again. The person who just moments ago felt crushed by anguish now begins to feel lifted, not by their own resilience, but by the presence of heaven moving inside them. Peace gives the soul room to breathe, to think clearly, to regain balance. It brings the soul back to itself, reminding it of its worth, its dignity, and its identity as a beloved child of God. Saint Michael breathes this peace with authority. His calm is not fragile, it is rooted in the victory of God. When he brings peace, he brings the certainty that the darkness has been pushed back, that the battle has shifted in your favor, and that God's protection is firmly established around your life. This peace reassures the heart that it is safe to rest, safe to trust, safe to hope. It gives you permission to let go of the tension you carried, to release the fears you tried to manage alone, and to step into the quiet that God has prepared for you. In this moment, peace becomes the voice of God speaking without words. It tells your heart, you are not alone. It tells your mind, you are safe. It tells your soul, you are held. And as this truth settles more deeply into you, the anguish that once felt suffocating loses its place. Peace takes its seat in the center of your being, anchoring you again in faith. This is the work of Saint Michael. This is the fruit of divine compassion. This is the descent of peace that now rests within you. A prayer for the heart that can no longer bear the burden. There comes a point in every person's life when the weight carried inside becomes too heavy to endure. It is the moment when the soul, exhausted from trying to stand alone, finally admits its limits. This moment is not failure, it is grace. It is the holy recognition that human strength is not infinite, and that the heart, no matter how resilient, was never meant to sustain suffering without divine help. When anguish tightens the chest, dims the mind, and steals the breath, the soul is invited into a sacred vulnerability, the vulnerability of surrender. In that space, beyond pretense and beyond pride, prayer begins to rise not from the lips alone, but from the deepest place of the spirit. A heart that can no longer bear its burden does not need eloquent words. It needs truth. It needs honesty. It needs to speak to God with the simplicity of a child and the urgency of someone drowning beneath the weight of emotion. And in this moment, Saint Michael the Archangel stands ready to receive that cry. He does not require perfection. He requires sincerity. He listens not to the articulation of the prayer, but to its intention. The prayer that rises from anguish is the kind heaven hears with particular tenderness. Take a breath now and imagine your heart opening, not in strength, but in surrender. Allow the guard you have kept for so long to loosen. Let the tears you have held back approach. Let the fatigue speak honestly. Now, with the seriousness of someone placing their heart into the hands of God, enter into this prayer. O Saint Michael the Archangel, defender of souls and guardian of those who suffer under the weight of darkness, I come before you with a heart unable to carry its burden any longer. You who stood firm at the dawn of time, you who cast down the ancient deceiver, you who protect the children of God with unwavering loyalty, look upon my suffering now. Lift from me the anguish that suffocates my spirit. Break the weight that presses against my chest. Scatter the shadows that surround my thoughts. Pierce through the confusion that clouds my mind. Protect me from every spiritual pressure that feeds fear and despair. Saint Michael, I beg you, stand beside me in this moment. Let your presence surround me like the shield of heaven. Let your sword cut away every lie that tells me I am alone, every fear that tells me I cannot endure, every sorrow that tells me hope has abandoned me. Defend my heart against the discouragement that rises without warning. Guard my mind against the thoughts that press inward like a storm. Deliver me from the anguish that steals my peace. Teach me to rest in the truth that God is near, that His love is stronger than my pain, and that His mercy is already at work within me. I place before you all I carry, my fears, my wounds, my memories, my disappointments, my silent suffering, my exhaustion. Take them into your keeping and bring them before the throne of God. Ask Him to pour His peace into the places where I am breaking. Ask Him to restore the parts of me that have grown weary. Ask Him to calm the trembling of my spirit. I am not ashamed to say that I need help. I am not afraid to confess that I cannot do this alone. I turn to heaven because I trust that heaven sees me, heaven hears me, and heaven will not let me fall. Saint Michael, breathe strength into me. Breathe clarity into my thoughts. breathe peace into my chest. With every breath I take, let the weight lessen. With every moment that passes, let the fear lose its grip. Guard me through this night and every moment ahead. Do not leave my side until peace has fully entered my heart. Carry me through this trial with the same authority that cast down the forces of rebellion. And as you defend me, help me to trust in the promises of God, who said through his Son in John chapter 14 verse 27 that he gives peace not as the world gives, but a peace the world cannot take away. Let that peace settle within me now. I surrender my anguish into the hands of God. I surrender my fear into his mercy. I surrender my pain into his healing. And under your protection, Saint Michael, I choose to believe that relief is coming, that peace is possible, and that the burden pressing on my heart will not have the final word. Stay with me, guard me, guide me, and lead me into the calm that only God can give. As this prayer fades, remain still. The heart has spoken, the soul has surrendered, and heaven has heard. Prayer opens what anguish closed. It unlocks spiritual doors that no human effort can force. Through this prayer, you have placed your suffering into divine hands, and those hands do not fail. The strength you lacked has been lifted, the weight you carried has been seen, and the peace that belongs to you is already on its way. The new breath, walking forward with peace guarded by Saint Michael. When anguish loosens its grip and peace begins its slow, gentle descent into the soul, something extraordinary takes place within the person. A new breath forms. Not merely a deeper inhale, not merely a calmer rhythm, but a different kind of breath. The breath of someone who has been touched by heaven. It is the breath of someone who has survived a spiritual battle and come out of it held, protected, and renewed. This new breath is not the product of human effort. It is the fruit of divine intervention. It is the sign that Saint Michael has not only fought for your heart, but now walks beside you, guarding your every step as you move forward. This new breath signifies that peace is no longer a distant concept, but a living presence within you. Peace does not always erase external problems immediately, but it changes how you carry them. Peace does not remove the memory of anguish, but it prevents anguish from governing your future. Peace does not silence the storms of life entirely, but it silences their power over your interior world. This is what it means to walk with Saint Michael's protection. The battle no longer controls you, because heaven now stands as your shield. Walking forward with this peace means understanding that you are no longer returning to life as you were before. Something has shifted. The soul that cried out, the heart that broke open, the spirit that surrendered in prayer has been transformed. You now carry an interior strength shaped not by the world, but by grace. Saint Michael's intervention has left a mark on your spirit, a mark the enemy can see and cannot cross. It is the mark of divine protection. It is the imprint of heaven's authority. It is the assurance that even when emotions fluctuate and challenges arise, you will not face them as you once did. Imagine your path ahead. You are not walking into uncertainty alone. Saint Michael walks with you, not hovering distantly, but moving near your side, attentive and vigilant. His wings form a protective boundary around your heart, guarding it from the return of the shadows that once suffocated you. His sword, once raised in battle, now gleams quietly as a symbol of victory, reminding every spiritual force that approaches that you are not unprotected. His presence stabilizes your thoughts when fear attempts to rise again. His calm strengthens your breath when anxiety tries to tighten your chest. His vigilance surrounds you at every hour. This new breath you carry is the evidence of his protection. It is the sign that your soul no longer inhales fear, but inhales grace. You begin to notice it in small ways. The thoughts that once spiraled now pass like distant clouds. The tension that once lived in your body now releases more quickly. The sadness that once lingered now lifts with prayer. The voice of discouragement that once felt loud now weakens when confronted with truth. This is not coincidence. This is the fruit of spiritual freedom. This is the peace Christ promised in John chapter 14, verse 27, the peace that cannot be stolen once given. And with this peace comes a new awareness. You begin to see that God was not absent in your anguish. He was preparing your deliverance. You begin to recognize that Saint Michael's intervention was not a moment, but the beginning of a companionship that will remain with you throughout your life. You begin to understand that your tears were not signs of weakness, but the doorway through which heaven entered your suffering. You begin to perceive that what once felt like breaking was actually the first crack through which light could enter. Walking forward with peace does not mean you will never feel fear again. It means fear will no longer master you. It does not mean you will never face struggles. It means you will never face them unprotected. Saint Michael's guardianship is not temporary. It endures as long as you seek the light of God. When emotional weight creeps back in, when old wounds resurface, when unexpected battles arise, you will find Saint Michael already standing between you and the darkness. His shield will rise before you notice the threat. His sword will cut down the discouragement before it coils around your spirit. His presence will steady you before the fear takes shape. This new breath is the reminder that you now walk in divine companionship. Every morning you rise with heaven's guard at your side. Every night you sleep beneath the wings of the Archangel. Every challenge you face with a defender who has already won the battle in the name of God. And each time anguish tries to return, you will recognize its falseness, because you have tasted the truth that you are not alone, that your suffering does not go unnoticed, that your heart is protected, and that peace is a gift renewed each time you seek it. So carry this new breath into tomorrow. Let it guide your steps. Let it soften your voice. Let it strengthen your spirit. Let it remind you that peace is not fragile when guarded by heaven. Saint Michael does not abandon those who trust in God. He remains vigilant and unwavering, ready to defend your heart each time you call upon him. And if anguish ever returns, if fear begins to whisper again, or sadness begins to press inward, return to this moment. Return to this prayer. Return to this presence. Saint Michael will meet you again.